Cineboys to Cinemen, episode 32. 32.
Oh.
Hope you're well, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. This week, The Old Oak.
Yes.
Ye Old Oak.
Kenneth Loach.
Ken Loach's recent and possibly final movie.
Yeah, he has said it's his swan song, so...
Yeah, he's bowing out at the ripe old age of 87, which is... I didn't realise he was that old.
That's crazy.
Which is silly, really, considering he's been sort of making films since the mid-60s. That would make sense.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, we're going to be talking about that in great depth and detail. Of course, we'll be then discussing a few of his other films and, indeed, the English social realism genre as a whole. We've cherry-picked a couple of examples. It's worth noting that when considering the genre, there's going to be a few glaring omissions, but, you know, brevity and such.
Yeah. I mean, you won't hear us talking about Transformers Revenge of the Fallen.
No.
Just because there's not enough time.
No.
Otherwise, we would. Maybe we'll do it for our patrons.
The most pivotal moment in English social realism.
Oh, yeah.
For our Patreon supporters.
Yeah.
Film?
Movie.
Questing the cinematic void. So before we get nice and deep into Ken, I guess it's worth considering English social realism as a whole, or as, you know, with as much time as the sort of time allotted for this podcast allows. It's existed perhaps as its own genre from the mid-60s, but before then it was, you know, preceded by lots of, you know, socially conscious narratives in the sort of 40s and 50s.
Okay, yeah.
One of my examples of which we're going to talk about in relation to English social realism. The sort of central thrust of it is this sort of exploration of working class English life and the class divides that have dogged and continue to dog modern Britain.
Yeah. Okay. I was just thinking, that film Saturday Night and Sunday Morning, was that the 50s? Could that be seen as a kind of a film preceding?
Yeah, I think it would be seen as like an essential sort of foundational building block of the genre.
Yeah.
Weirdly, it's weird that you say that because it's one of the ones, the sort of main important ones I haven't seen.
Oh, really?
And,
okay. I have actually seen that. That's strange.
Cool. Yeah. So I ordered it on Blu-ray like last week, hoping to have seen it before, and it just hasn't arrived. So
man.
I've tried, but I've heard only ever good things about it, and it's obviously a very pivotal moment for the history of British cinema generally.
Yeah.
But I guess, like, you know, for me, when I think about English social realism, it's a genre that I didn't really give the time of day until my sort of mid to late 20s, and I think during our sort of planning and preparational discussions that we have before we start, it was kind of similar for you, right?
Yeah, so I did a module at university with good old Mark, and it was that the module was effectively British social realism. However, I found myself not really getting on with the films that were screened as much as I'd hoped, so my attention was never really... my head was never really turned by it that much, which is a shame because we did get screened some good films, incling Saturday Night and Sunday Morning. Actually.
Oh, okay, that's when you saw it, right?
That's why I've watched it.
Yeah.
And that one I did really like, but I don't think as a sort of an 18-year-old, I don't think I really got it. I think where I grew up didn't help. Maybe it was the southeast of England. Obviously, that I'd be hard pressed to think of a film apart from maybe like a film set in the suburbs of London, which is not where I grew up, like that would be considered a British social realism or English social realism film.
Right, okay.
It's not like any set in Eastbourne, for example, you know what I mean? So yeah, no, you're right. I don't really have my interest in it has largely been quite relatively recent.
Yeah, I think for me it's a genre that I don't know, because I was thinking about it in the context of you know really getting into movies when I was younger, and obviously getting older and watching different kinds of films from different cultures, and I think you know I was never afraid of the idea of watching films that explore similar themes in other countries.
Yeah, right, sure.
But there was something about this social realist English thing that really didn't jibe with me for a very long time.
Yeah.
And I guess, I mean, living on council estates and stuff like that. I don't know if maybe part of that, not that my life is in any way comparable to a lot of the narratives in these films, but
the setting
is familiar enough. Some of the characters might be familiar enough that you sort of might meet in passing, or people that are like your sort of parents' friends, or your mates' parents' friends, or so I think it has a lot to do with that. I think it's maybe a bit too close, just in terms of like familiar, not necessarily closest in terms of experience, but in terms of like it just feeling like you sort of know it by living around it and in and around it. And I think that's the case for a lot of people. I remember having that discussion with a few people in our course back at uni, and they sort of all said similar things. Like no matter where they came from, they all sort of felt that there was something a bit too sort of familiar, or so I think that's probably what it is.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. I think like why would you're not going to be clambering to see a film based on a realist film as well, so not even a film with any kind of visual flair or frills, which isn't really what the genre's about.
No,
you wouldn't be clambering to see it because you, like you say, you just live it. You're totally right.
Yeah, and I guess as well at that age, film. I remember there being a really distinct moment for me when studying film where I realised, how sort of widely varied cinema can be in the intention and the impact. When I watched 400 Blows, which weirdly would twin well with our discussion about English social realism.
Yeah, completely.
Something
like Cinema Paradiso as well. That kind of vibe. However, having it set in your own country is a bit strange.
But realising that and thinking, fucking hell, films aren't just about like entertainment and ninjas and gunfights and gangsters and dinosaurs. It can be, I don't know. Which is probably, it's quite embarrassing to sort of acknowledge that so late in my film watching life. But
I know I feel the same way about like photography and paintings and stuff. Like it's only in the last 5 years or so that, for example, like a photograph of like an old mining town and the people that work there, that would fascinate me. Maybe 5 years ago, it probably wouldn't have so much.
Yeah, maybe just your appreciation for things like that grows as you get older. Maybe.
Completely.
But you're right, I want to sort of tap into that thing about what you're saying about the sort of no frills approach to English social realism. It is very much about sort of framing the sort of everyday struggles and difficulties of English, working class or indeed lower class life in a way that is completely devoid of, as you said, flair.
Yeah.
And I think that is probably another reason for that, what we've just talked about. But it's so important to this particular movement of cinema that it's like that, isn't it?
Oh, completely. Yeah, it would literally be categorized as something else had it, even if there was like a lot of flashbacks or something, that would be that. It wouldn't be belong to that genre anymore, I don't think.
Yeah,
it has to be very linear, very, I think grey is the wrong word, but very things tend to go from bad to worse in their narratives, or even if there is something redemptive, it doesn't. The redemption in this narrative doesn't overwhelm the fact that it's clear that it's going to be a while before any of these characters see any real hope or light, as is the case with Old Oak, I think, anyway. Although there is a redemptive side to that film, which I will kind of build on later. But in general, they're tough watches because they are very frank about working class life, day-to-day struggle and existence, and that's just that's the intention. It's not like cinema of it's not cinema of cruelty or anything. It doesn't ever stray into that kind of torturous vibe, but it does walk that line a little bit, I suppose.
Yeah, I think the idea of there being no thrills and no flair in terms of technique and approach, sort of cinematically speaking, works on a thematic and narrative level as well. It would do the ideas of these films a disservice. It's about people struggling to deal with life in an economic system that for them is completely unfair. And they are having to try and navigate a life often around other people that are living very much a sort of similar life and feeling similar things. So the idea that there would be this sort of fanciful moment of escapism, for example, would do these films a disservice, because there is obviously a political message that is supposed to rouse its viewer into sort of challenging the sort of economic doctrines and systems that exist that have created these situations for these people in the first place.
Yeah.
So, I think there's a very sort of conscious political, it's very obvious to say that, but, it's very consciously present in most social realist films. It's interesting you talk about this lack of flair, because I saw a film recently, Scrapper.
Oh, right, okay, yeah.
Which was, obviously clearly indebted to a lot of classic kitchen sink social realist films.
Right, yeah.
But it had a real sort of artistic flair to it.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. It had a lot of really stylized cinematography and really sort of quick cut editing sort of sequences that almost felt like a music video at points.
Oh, really?
And then there were sequences where I think the director's intention was to sort of replicate how a child superimposes the way in which they deal with difficult things onto their environment.
Okay.
So it's the kid had spiders that lived in the house, and she'd named all the spiders, and there was little scenes where the spiders were talking and stuff. It was really straight. Yeah, Okay. I mean, I did sort of didn't expect to mention this film, but I found that sort of a bit incongruent, and it bothered me a little bit.
Okay.
Until I heard an interview with the director, whose name escapes me. That's really bad of me, but she was saying that she didn't want her films to necessarily wallow in that sort of
in the mire
of social realism, which I thought was quite an interesting take. I think she acknowledges it, and there's quite a few moments in the film that are definitely very social realist, and sort of the rawness of the performances, and the sort of this commitment to characters that are just as capable of fucking up as the rest of us. So there's elements of it. I've seen it in a few films that of this ilk, that they're using social realism as a foundation, but breaking off and making their own.
You could argue Trainspotting did something a bit like that, maybe.
Yeah, that's true.
It's very kind of almost the way it's cut is very MTV.
The music as well.
Oh, of course, the soundtrack kind of makes it more eclectic.
Bop, right.
Yeah. And also, you can maybe argue something like Gregory's Girl. Have you seen that?
No.
I think it was a double feature with Kes.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Gregory's Girl was
oh shit! I know nothing about that.
It's just a really it's right. It's just like a really sweet sort of school romance story, but set in a very kind of social realist backdrop. But because, like you say, it's told from the eyes of, in this case, it's like a 16-year-old boy, quite an awkward fella. It adds a layer of charm, this childlike charm. But like you say, the foundation is very social realism esque sphere. No, esque. Yeah. No, I'd check it out. It's really good, really sweet little movie.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. We talk about this idea of films pulling away from that sort of stark, almost sort of deliberately sort of flat cinematography and the way it sort of captures sort of the interior spaces of council flats, typically, or council estates.
Yep.
There's this sort of real departure from that is happening, and it's interesting to talk about in the context of Ken Loach, because I think certainly his three newer films, which are part of this trilogy, this concluding trilogy, as we've said, possibly his last film. With The Old Oak. But I feel like these films stray a little bit further away from social realism than certainly his older work does. I think there's something a lot more, not melodramatic, but there is a certain element of drama that I think he's injecting into his films that he perhaps didn't do in his early work. And I'm not just saying his work in the 60s. I even feel like some of his stuff in the 90s felt a lot more restrained in terms of the drama.
Yeah, Carla's song is
and even Raining Stones, which has some overtly comedic moments in it, it still sort of felt grounded in the sort of social realist trappings, I guess. For lack of a better word, it's probably not the right word. But, and I feel like his newer films seem to feel a little bit more dramatic.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about that scene in I, Daniel Blake when he goes out and starts spray painting the wall.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily something you see every day, is it?
No, that's true.
I mean, well, you could argue Kes has the childlike thing as well with the Kestrel, but that is very much rooted in, I mean, it's not a nice ending, is it? Spoilers for Kes. Don't bet, if someone tells you to bet on some horses, bet on those horses. No, but you're right, there is definitely flourishes of, certainly narratively, of more conventional, I guess, plot points.
Yeah.
Certainly in I, Daniel Blake, the bit where that's on the poster, isn't it?
Yeah.
Literally, that's why it's called I, Daniel Blake, I suppose, is because there's a moment of where he's so fed up with everything
there's almost a moment of catharsis.
Yeah. Which is unusual for a film that, rooted in those genre trappings.
Yeah, agreed. So I think the way we want to structure the discussion this week is usually we would talk about the director's films before we talk about the film in question, but I think we're going to try sort of weaving in a few of his films as we talk about Old Oak a bit later on. So let's talk about some of our favourite, or maybe some, not necessarily favourite examples of English social realism, but films that we feel are worth talking about on this much lauded
worthy
podcast.
Of our prestigious attention.
Yes, there we go. Much better.
Nice. Do you want to shoot first, or
I can shoot first.
Yeah.
So I was going to start with a film called Room at the Top.
Okay.
So it's a film directed in 1959 by Jack Clayton. It stars Lee Harvey of Manchurian Candidate fame.
Not Lee Harvey Oswald.
No, God no.
Noted assassin.
Yeah, noted assassin plus actor of English social realist early kitchen sink dramas. And the reason I sort of wanted to talk about it is because it's sort of often spoken about as one of the first films to really adopt a lot of these sort of things that we sort of now consider to be, English social realist. I'm not going to say that with absolute certainty because my research isn't as watertight as usual. This is coming from the same podcast as the Korean and Vietnam War mixed up. It's a film that explores the class divide in a small Yorkshire town.
No, okay.
So it's set in Yorkshire.
Yeah.
Which I can't think of many films of that era that are really.
Not in the 50s.
No. I mean, again, this is something that probably loads, but to my knowledge,
there's not a lot. Like I'd struggle to. I can think of a few off the top of my head, but it's only because I tried to write one once, and there's only 3 or 4 in my head that I can think of. But there we go.
So Lee Harvey plays a sort of a drifter. Comes to a new town, and he is basically someone that he wants to climb the social ladder and quick.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So the way he does this, he's very good at his job. I think he works in like an accounting department of some factory. But he knows that no matter how good he is at his job, he is never going to sort of achieve the aspiration that he has of being high up. I'm talking about like creme de la creme, business owners, land-owned aristocracy, that sort of thing.
Yeah, right, okay.
So alongside working this new job in this new factory, he basically targets the daughter of a rich family.
Okay, yeah.
And just basically begins this campaign of trying to get this woman to endear herself to him.
Yeah.
And Lee Harvey has the looks and the charm, even if a lot of the charm is manufactured for his goals. But he is someone that he lacks in status or money. He makes up for, I guess, in his own mind with the things like, looks, etc. we mentioned before.
Yeah.
So as he sort of tries to win this girl's favour, the family of this girl become more and more aware of that, and there's a lot more sort of vitriol shot towards this chap.
Yeah.
There's a love rival who's someone, again, that comes from that stock. So it's, of course, the preferred option for the daughter. And obviously this is like post-war Britain, so obviously the shadow of World War II is looming. A lot of people still ask questions about where they served, and this guy is like a higher rank than him in the military and all this sort of stuff.
Okay.
And Lee Harvey's character is fueled by this bitter resentment towards the elite, towards the established order.
Yeah.
And yet he simultaneously wants to be part of it. And it talks about this idea. I mean, there are many interesting themes in the film, but I think one of the first ones to note is this idea of aspiration.
Yeah.
The economic system we live in is built on this idea of aspiration.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of that is hidden amongst resentment, particularly from lower classes and the people who work in these factories that make these people so rich. They all through the strength of community and togetherness, they sort of espouse a hatred for the elite, a hatred for their way of life, but all secretly probably wouldn't mind a bit of that themselves.
Yeah, okay.
And there's a sadness to that, like a real hollowness throughout the film that sort of permeates and grows in intensity as the film goes on and on.
I suppose there's a sort of naivety to it as well, and in that they don't, people aren't going to fully understand just how corruptible money can make people. So they're going to be thinking, oh, if I was that wealthy, I'd do it all differently. And then, unfortunately, I'm guessing maybe a theme. I haven't seen it, but maybe a theme in the film is that actually that might not be the case at all. It's just born out of naivety a bit.
Yeah, I think there's this sort of understanding that that it's really difficult to attain.
Right. Yeah.
And yet there is the father of the daughter. He's a sort of the archetypal sort of champion of capitalism in the sense that he rose from nothing, rags to riches sort of story.
Okay.
This is the sort of story that all these capitalists will bang to the high heavens about. They will say, work hard and you will be this guy. You will achieve the success. Okay. And this character will frequently mentions and makes allusions to this past of his. And whilst that probably makes him a little bit softer and a little bit less prepared to shoot Lee Harvey's character down so readily, it's clear that this life of opulence has impacted him as an individual, and he's forgotten his roots.
Okay.
So how could you not?
Yeah.
And I think you're right about the way that money corrupts people, not just those that have it, but those that desire it. There's
completely.
a corruption there.
Yeah.
But so initially for Lee Harvey's character, despite the sort of the young daughter showing a bit of affection towards him, it seems impossible. And he ends up meeting a woman called Alice Asgill, who's a bit older than him. And it's played brilliantly by Simone Signore. Great actress in her own right. Sorry about the name. And she's a French lady who's in an unhappy marriage with an unfaithful yet possessive man of moderate wealth in the community. Okay. And as he sort of struggles with his sort of resentments, and this starts to sort of come to terms with this idea that this plan isn't going to work, he falls in love with this woman. And they forge a genuine connection. Yeah. There's attraction, obviously, but there's a genuine connection between them. However, as the film goes on, he then has to decide between pursuing this life that he's, coveted despite his resentment and bitterness.
Yeah.
Or a genuine connection with this woman. And as the film goes on, the opportunity presents itself to get with this younger woman. I don't want to sort of spoil it too much because I want you to see it.
You've set it up there. I really want to watch. I want to know what happens now. That's really interesting.
But it's interesting because not only is it about this idea of obviously the sort of quiet desires of the working class and the poor that is shrouded in their resentment, and as you say, the sort of intoxicating allure of wealth.
Yeah. It's
also about the sort of how the business class, the ruling class, behave and how they strengthen and consolidate their power, societally speaking.
Right.
So there's something sort of quite medieval about it. When we talk about how kings would sort of sell off their offspring to sort of broker alliances and strengthen their own hold on the throne, right?
Yeah.
It's very similar. The ruling elite will use their daughter to sort of marry someone of good stock to strengthen their position because they're getting family ties to someone who perhaps is richer, or to help sort of ease a business merger or something like that.
Yeah.
So there's something really sort of dehumanizing about that process. Not only is it dehumanizing if you're at the bottom of the ladder in a fucking tiny house working ungodly amount of hours in a factory every day.
Yeah.
It's also dehumanizing to be the offspring of these people, particularly women.
Of course.
Because you are basically an asset that can be used to strengthen your position.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that going on, and there's a real starkness to the film. The film isn't particularly flashy in its cinematography. It's black and white, of course. There's a lot of tight interior spaces, and the exteriors are they're not sort of majestic sweeping shots. It's all very functional cinematography.
Yeah, okay.
And you really get the sense it's that sort of laying the sort of foundational building blocks for this genre. I just felt it was really worth talking about because it's a film I'd only seen very recently, but it's something I'd seen a lot about.
Yeah.
And I was really into Lee Harvey for a while after watching The Manchurian Candidate.
Right, okay.
Which for a while I really, really loved. And I rewatched it and wasn't as keen, but I still liked it. But Lee Harvey's absolutely magnetic in that film, and it's really brilliant here as well.
Okay,
so it's worth a go.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. It's funny. Jack Clayton, I think he directed something called. Have you seen The Innocents?
No, but I know that's one of his. Yeah,
that's really good. He's a fantastic director. And actually, The Innocents has quite a lot of flashy stuff in it, like quite a lot of camera trickery to kind of portray these sort of ghostly figures. It's an adaptation of Turn of the Screw, which has been adapted a lot. But it's a really great story and a really great adaptation. As soon as you mentioned his name, I was like, Jack, I recognise that. Yeah, that's another one to not really social realist, but very good nonetheless.
It shows a sense of adaptability, though, right?
I think, completely.
Really fascinating.
Judging from what you said just then, he definitely. I mean, he sounds like he's quite a dynamic filmmaker.
Yeah.
Cool.
What you got for me, baby?
Right. Let me just grab my notes.
Handwritten again.
So I wanted to talk about Fish Tank, which I feel like we might have mentioned before.
We have very briefly.
Yeah, because we went on to Andrea Arnold for some reason earlier on.
She's one of the directors for the Deep Dive, isn't she?
Yeah, which would be fascinating to talk about. So I'll keep this short for that reason.
Did we see this film together?
Fish Tank.
Q&A with Andrea Arnold.
I did not go to that Q&A, and
you didn't.
I regret it.
I
really regret not going because I think the film's wicked and I really like Andrea Arnold, and I'm an idiot for not going to that Q&A because everyone at uni always talks about it to this day.
And now, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It must have been fantastic. So Fish Tank, effectively, it's a relatively simple story, not unlike the story you just mentioned. Just in terms of that aspirational vibe it's got going for it. It's so it's Mia. She's a 15-year-old who lives on a kind of southeast. I think it's like an East London council estate.
Yeah.
And she has aspirations to be a dancer. And it's about her navigating her day-to-day existence with this kind of dream that she holds quite dear to her.
Yeah.
But the environment that she's in it makes it very difficult to express that dream to her family and to those around her because they're all too busy, battling addiction problems or just trying to get on with their lives and
as best they can in the situation.
Exactly, and she's got this kind of thing that she really wants to do, but it's just totally it can only be nurtured by her. And her mum gets a new fella. Played by Michael Fassbender.
This is early Fassbender.
It is, 2009.
Him sort of rising up, isn't it? Yeah.
Same year as Inglourious Bastards, weirdly.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, strangely.
Strange. Yeah.
But so this was when before he kind of got into the mainstream stream. And so there's a scene which I only considered recently to be quite sort of heartbreaking in that she performs a dance for him to California Dreaming. Which has its own.
Is that against the blue wall?
Yeah. And it's like it's quite. I mean, the song choice is quite overt in that she wants to become this sort of big, famous dancer, and he takes it as an opportunity to start sleeping with her. And it all gets a bit blurred, and she's really weirdly very grateful for the attention. She sort of reciprocates his advances based on the fact that she's just performed this dance for him and that he really liked it. But actually, obviously all he's actually doing is trying to have sex with an underage girl. He's horrible, horrible guy. And it's just about that and her kind of finding out just how difficult it can be to sort of pursue a dream in that environment, along with a very complicated affair she starts having, and it's really good, really nice. There's a sort of spark of hope in her character. You get the feeling like one day she might make something of herself, which is again sort of unusual for a social realist film. But it's a really captivating story, and it's got I won't give too much away, but it's got like a reasonably hopeful ending. I don't know if you remember.
I can't remember the ending at all,
It's just a shot of a balloon flying away.
Oh, yeah.
Again, quite an overt visual metaphor, but it works in this context, I think. Really great film. I would always recommend Fish Tank to anyone, because anyone over 15, maybe.
Yeah. No, I really love the movie. It's interesting. We were during the Q&A. Sorry.
That's right.
She was talking about the casting process, and I think it was before she started. It would have been American Honey.
Oh right, yeah.
And she was talking about the way she casts people, and she was saying that she's all about like finding people with like, you know, just normal people or people that like, you know, with imperfections, you know,
kind of like This Is England style. Thomas Turgoose got cast in the,
exactly,
because he wasn't an actor, right?
Yes, yeah. She's non-actors, with I guess some sort of attachment to the sort of setting that they work in.
Yeah,
that the character obviously they're playing lives in. And like I guess in stark contrast to a lot of the way sort of the film industry works and casting people, it's not about previous credits or like having a look. You know, it's just about being as normal as possible.
Yeah.
And I swear I might be wrong with this, but she said that she saw this girl. I don't know if she'd had an audition or not. Who ended up playing the lead.
Yeah.
And she saw her having an argument with her boyfriend on the other side of a train station.
Yeah.
And was like, that's the girl I want.
I've heard this story.
Yeah.
I wasn't at the Q&A, but I have heard this. I think that is true. Yeah. That's fascinating. And
speaks volumes about her approach as a director in terms of breathing that kind of realism into the story.
Yeah, and
right
also
from the outset.
That's such a smart way of doing it. I mean, it can backfire if you get someone who can't act. As we'll just maybe touch on a bit later on. But in this instance, I think she had a few weeks of rehearsal and she got a chance to sort of spend some time with the director and develop a character. Katie Jarvis, I think.
Oh yeah.
She was in EastEnders afterwards. I think she's fallen off the acting. Fallen out of the acting world recently for various reasons, but yeah, it is that I've heard that story. I think that is actually true,
and I find it is a really interesting film because again I feel like there's some slight departure in the sort of cinematic approach from social realism, and the film does have a lot more moments that are overtly cinematic.
Yeah.
But it doesn't detract from the sort of setting of the film and the social realist credentials that Andrea Arnold is clearly sort of indebted to really as a filmmaker. I think I mentioned this before, but her short film The Wasp was on Mubi for a while, and I watched that.
Oh, okay.
The one she won the Oscar for.
Yes, yeah,
and that's a lot more social realist.
Right, okay.
The sort of camera, the way the camera sort of is almost like the mum is like, and her kids are moving hastily through the estate. The camera's moving with them, and it's all really sort of almost feels like consciously jolty. So it's interesting to see a transition to sort of a bit more control with the camera and a lot more sort of the term flair.
No, I agree.
A great filmmaker and a really great movie. And I really like what you were saying about the way in which like she has to nurture her own dreams.
Yeah, it's quite sad. The scenes that she does it, because she there's like a bit where she finds an advert for a paid job as a dancer, and obviously what it's actually going to be is it's basically in a strip club. But she kind of sees that as an opportunity, and she is naive in the sense that any 15-year-old would be, and she goes for that chance all on her own as well. Which is she's got a sort of spirit about her which is quite infectious. It's lovely.
It's interesting, isn't it, that sort of that dream is so easily manipulated by people outside of maybe inside in the case of Michael Fassbender's character, but outside of it as well. It's almost like there are people waiting for people to have these dreams that they can sort of manipulate and distort until the person's doing this thing, and it's so far removed from what they actually set out to do, but they just accept it on the basis of accepting their lot. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like one step closer. And it is horrible and tragic, but luckily, I mean, I can't say this for a lot of social realist films, but the film has got a segment of hope at the end, which I think is really needed as well, because there's some quite tough scenes in that film. What have you got? Fire, shoot.
Mike Lee's Secrets and Lies.
Yes, okay.
Pulls that up. Again, a film that is perhaps more anchored in the elements of sort of family drama, but I think really sort of thematically shares a lot of social realist tropes, I guess. A lot more of the sort of identity of social realism within them. It's a film about a well-educated black woman who is an optometrist, works with eyes. Right, she's
optician.
No, she's not an optician. She's not
optometrist.
Okay. Something like that. and her her adopted mother dies, and she then sort of inspires her to find her birth mother.
Yeah.
So her adopted mother is black.
Yeah.
She's black. She seeks out her birth mother and finds out that she's a white, lower class woman who works in a factory, who has an estranged relationship with her daughter who lives with her, and an estranged relationship with her brother, played by Timothy Spall, who's magnificent in this film. I mean, he's a very much a Mike Leigh mainstay. He's wonderful in every film that I've seen him in with Mike Leigh, but here he's particularly superb. And his wife as well. She has an estranged relationship with his wife. And why I think this film has these sort of social realist elements is because of how much the racial and perhaps more class divides quietly gnaw away at the family dynamic.
Okay, yeah.
And you start to sort of understand, and you start to realise that a lot of the sort of growing canyons between different family members, of course, they're aided by the secrets and lies.
Yeah.
But it's also the sort of the class bitterness. The mum is very bitter about the wealth of her brother.
Yeah.
Her brother's a really nice bloke, doesn't lord it over his family. But his wife does.
Okay, yeah.
And his wife is someone that's very much prim and proper, very much, in her own sort of upper middle class bubble. And she finds interacting with that side of his family difficult on the basis that she can't really relate to them.
Yeah.
On the basis of experience. So that's just one little inkling of like the sort of how these sort of class divides can just impact something as allegedly pure as the family, Mike Leigh himself in the casting process, or the process of, helping the actors with their characters, only told each actor their part of the story.
Yeah, I've heard him doing. Yeah,
he didn't tell the actors the overarching narrative. So when they hear the revelations that reveal in the film,
yeah, okay,
the actors are seeing it for the first time, and it's honestly one of the best acted films I think I've ever seen. There are some moments in the film that are just unbelievable.
Yeah,
it's like, and again, it's this sort of, so many films strive for realism but don't achieve it.
Yeah.
Whereas Mike Leigh's careful direction and the way in which he almost manipulates his actors, so much so that they almost become these characters more.
Yeah.
And as the mother, meets this lady and they start to forge a relationship, that obviously starts to expose a lot more of these sort of these divisions and the lies and secrets that prevent these divisions from ever going away.
Yeah.
And it all comes to a head with one of the most cathartic, well, actually unbelievably tense and subsequently cathartic dinner sequences ever committed to film.
I remember that scene, yeah.
And Timothy Spall just has a fucking blowout and loses his mind.
Yeah.
And it kind of ends in quite a nice way, because the family realise there's sort of, how dangerous it is for not just sort of like their ability to connect with each other, but their sort of individual happiness is to keep these things from each other.
Yeah.
And how pointless it is to allow things like, money and status to almost provide the foundation for these divisions.
Okay, yeah.
So it does end, perhaps, I mean, there's a lot of sort of residual, you never quite work out how the mum had a black child,
right, okay.
But it's sort of implied through ways that aren't very nice.
Yeah, of course.
So there's a lot of stuff that doesn't get resolved, but I think the central thrust of the narrative is sort of resolved by Timothy Spall, who's almost like this guardian angel for the family. This really nice bloke that never puts a foot wrong, and if he, and eventually he just can't hide it anymore.
Yeah,
and it made me think about family life in general and how, like, divisions between certain family members can happen and how easy it can happen just by the lack of talking to one another. Like, silence between each other can be so destructive.
Yeah. I always think that inaction is, we're all guilty of it, but inaction can quite often be just as bad as action, right?
Yeah.
It's just that scene isn't pleasant, but it does mean something for that reason, I think.
Yeah.
That's great.
But it's just that thing, like, there's that scene where they all go around to the house, and before the meal, the sort of the wife, Timothy Spall's wife, is sort of showing them around the house.
Right, yeah.
And it's like,
it's
so awkward because she's talking about the decorations she's done. It's almost like she's had a blank check to decorate this house, and it's such in stark contrast to the mum's house, who's like their old family home that's falling apart to the point where it's like unhealthy and dangerous to live in certain rooms.
Yep.
And, you know, you've got that in your back of your mind the whole time, and you sort of feel really sort of sorry for the mum on the basis of that she's basically just being shown something that she will never have.
Yeah.
I don't know, I feel like this sort of divide is it's so grounded by putting it in the sort of the grounds of sort of familial dysfunctionality. It grounds it in a way that I think so few social realist films actually achieve that level of sort of like thematic penetration. But you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
completely.
you know,
I think it all boils down to the fact that films, like it or not, are a constructed reality, right?
Yeah.
And obviously British and English social realism is striving towards like masking that construction as much as possible, and Mike Leigh does such a good job of it.
Oh god, yeah.
Because of his process, it's so unique. Like, I heard this quite a lot about him in the way he works with his actors. Like a lot of rehearsal, but like 1-to-1 rehearsal apparently.
Yeah.
So like you say, he spends ages talking about the backstory and like, you know, what you do in the scene. This is what you're going to do in this scene, and then you stop talking, and from there on we'll see what happens, and you just have to react from there. It's so fascinating, and I think other people have tried to replicate that and it hasn't really worked. But there's something logistical about the way Mike Leigh does it. He just pulls it off, and it's really great.
I think if you see it in a lot of his movies, there's an attention to detail that is very considered, and it feels like they're all products of this mutual process of creation between the actor and the director. The director has an idea, but in obscuring information from the actors, he's allowing the actors to imprint more of themselves and the characters, inhabit the space of those characters more. So, you know, in that dinner scene in Secrets and Lies, you know, you are seeing the revelations genuinely impact actors who have a vested interest in these characters. And, you know, and almost like the characters like sharing a part of their actor's body in a way. I mean, that's obviously something that I'm sure an actor's probably said thousands of times about the roles they've played in many different film types, but I just feel like it really feels like the purest form of that in this particular film. I just was consistently blown away by the performances in a way that I so rarely am in films. And obviously, you know, most films that you watch in the cinema, you know, you're going to, obviously, the suspension of disbelief and the quality of acting, usually you don't really think that you might think they're miscast or the script lets them down, but 9 times out of 10 you think, they're doing a fairly serviceable enough job. It's rare that someone's so fucking shit it pulls you out of the film. Yeah, completely. So obviously there's a standard that you expect as a film watcher, but obviously there are plenty of films that, you know, that we've talked about in this podcast, you know, that we've, you know, waxed lyrical about the performances, but I've never known a film quite like it in regards to just wholesale acting across the board. Brilliant. It's just unbelievable. Nice. Yeah. Sorry, I've gone off on one. Not at all, mate. No, it's good. I need to revisit that film. I think I will. I want to briefly mention, I haven't seen this in a while, and a lot of the plot beats in it are a bit hazy in my mind, but I do need to mention a film called The Selfish Giant. Okay, I've not seen this, so I'm intrigued. Yeah, I mean, I can't relay the entire plot because it's been a while, but I just remember there being some really striking imagery in it from a sort of, it's set in Bradford, I think, sort of suburban Bradford. Okay. I've never seen so many pylons in one film. So many pylons in it, but strangely, I always think pylons are quite nice and easy to shoot because they're like a vertical thing on a horizontal plane. Yeah. And then, but there's in The Selfish Giant, there's some of the film is concerned with this boy's relationship with this horse. So he takes care of a horse a lot, like it's a bit like Kes. It's got Kes vibes, except it's not a kestrel. It's a slightly larger animal. But there's a lot of really striking imagery in this that concerns
this kind of twisted metal structures and all this kind of crumbling buildings, and these boys are quite frequently on the hunt for scrap metal. But he's taking care of this horse, and there's something like that the Lloyd's adverts don't do right that should, like, there's something magnificent about a horse and something so kind of natural and kind about the and very British as well, I think.
There's something about the way the horse has sort of fused itself with humanity.
Yeah,
as like a sort of like companion, servant.
Yes, gentle.
Worker,
Exactly.
Yeah,
in a way that I feel like westerns ignore, because they're just used as like vehicles in westerns. Like but in it's a bit of a tangent. But no, just worth a mention. Cleo Barnard. There's another film of hers called Dark River, which is also very good. Another film set in Yorkshire as well. But no, there's something special about that. I'd give it a go. I've got it on DVD, I think.
Is it sort of like Kes in the sense that the presence of this animal lifts the central character from whatever sort of mire they're in terms of their housing situation or the relationship with their family?
Yeah, a lot of the film is about his relationship with his mate, actually.
Okay.
And going around, they're largely sort of self-sufficient. They're not. They do have family homes, but there is kind of a down and out vibe about it, classic, that does get lifted by this boy's sort of reciprocated kindness that this horse shows to him. It's like, it's very nice, very good little, very sweet film. Ventures slightly into almost sickly sweet at times, I would say.
Okay.
But it is grounded by quite a tragic story as well. Yeah, I think it's funny. I didn't really consider this before now, but very briefly, I want to talk about films like, you've seen like Brassed Off and like, obviously The Full Monty. And
yeah.
I think there's a definite relationship with social realism, like very overtly in The Full Monty, but also with like Brassed Off, just in the sense that it's about like a mining community. It's in the Thatcher years, right? And although these films are largely kind of plot centric, whether that be because of a romance or because of like a kind of like the Full Monty being the kind of the male stripper angle, which is very fanciful and very kind of like British comedy, 90s British comedy that is separate from social realism, but there are roots there, don't you think?
I completely agree, and I'm really glad you mentioned Full Monty, because I bloody love that movie. And it's funny, like, the social consciousness in that film is, it sort of bubbles underneath what is essentially quite a light-hearted sort of English comedy. But there's a real social consciousness to it. I mean, I always think about that scene, I think I mentioned this before, but the scene with the guy who's trying to kill himself in the car.
Oh yeah, God,
and that's sort of played for laughs at a point, and it is, it sort of succeeds in some way, but it does sort of reveal the nature of the economic situation that Sheffield is in. You consider Sheffield, it was a metal industry.
Steel.
Steel, and stripped of that, and left to rot, really. And and that's obviously going to have a huge impact on the population. If populations are during the Industrial Revolution, that's what brought people from the countryside to the cities was industry. You strip that industry away, then what built that city, what put it there in the first place, is gone. And I think you really feel the impact of that, the shock waves going through, as we've said, a light-hearted comedy in many elements of its construction, certainly narratively speaking. But you really feel that in the characters and the pain, I think, underneath the comedy. And it's funny, every time I watch that film, I become more aware of the pain. I watched it fairly recently. I'd always sort of written it off as a sort of fairly naff 90s film that like your mum would watch.
It's got that label about
which is... I'm so glad I realised how wrong I was, because it's just an excellent film.
It is very good,
and it's a film that I think it's one of those films that you could watch like 2 or 3 times a year. You sort of have to.
Definitely. No, I love that film as well. I think it's
I think it's worth bringing up in the context of social realism, in the sense that social realism, obviously it isn't.
No.
But it's lent itself to many other films that want to do many other things. But it gives those films a political and social consciousness that I think makes Full Monty so great.
Oh man, yeah. Same with Brassed Off as well. Have you seen that one?
Yeah, my memory isn't as good on that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's a similar-ish vibe to the Full Monty. I think it came out afterwards, and I think it might have been piggybacking off of its success a little bit.
Well, that's film for you, isn't it? That's the industry.
Exactly. But there's some charming moments in that as well, and that's got a very socially conscious side to it, which is completely, again, aped from the social realism genre.
Nice. Yeah. Old Oak?
Yes.
I think the good place to start would be picking up from our outro in the last episode, where we voiced concerns regarding the trailer being overtly theatrical in the presentation of themes, which is not only sort of in opposition with the way in which Loach works, but social realism works.
Yep.
Upon watching the film, what are your thoughts regarding that? Did they feel reinforced or not?
Yeah, they do.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was mainly... I don't know if I was looking out for it, but I was really surprised by just how unsubtle and overt all of the dialogue was. Mm-hmm. Not all of it. Some of it works. I'll say this now. It wasn't like I'm really mixed on it. I'm like there's certain scenes that really got to me and were actually really effective and really emotional. And then there was some other scenes, a lot of scenes in the pub involving the locals that I was like, I'm not buying this. I'm not buying the dialogue. I'm not buying the performances. You're taking me out of the film because of your theatricality. And it was so strange that they were quite often then... a scene right afterwards would then be really powerful again and really interesting and unique and like it's not subtle, but okay, like for example, there's a bit at the beginning where someone smashes her camera, and I was like, oh god, I hate this is horrible. Like I'm really I feel for her so much. They're not cheap for a start. SLRs are not cheap. And this fucking guy just smashes it. I'm like, okay, you're making me hate him. I'm meant to hate him because he's like a thug, isn't he? Like a nasty sort of racist thug. Although obviously, at the same time, you kind of understand in a strange sense that that's where he's grown up, and he's got like I think that it's touched on that he's got some addiction problems. Yeah. And so it's confusing and like morally quite troubling to think about that. But then I don't know. There's just something about the dialogue which is. In certain other scenes, the locals at the pub chatting, I'm not racist, but that kind of stuff really, really stilted and really threw me off. What about you? Sorry.
No. I think I did feel like the film wasn't particularly subtle. I think you're very right on it being very much on the nose. I think we sort of said this in the context of his other two films of this sort of trilogy. Starting with our Daniel Blake, that subtlety doesn't really seem to be his objective anymore.
No.
And when you consider it in that lens, and you consider it the kind of topics that he's covering about the state of modern Britain, be that sort of unemployment, our Daniel Brake, our Daniel Brake,
yeah.
It sounds like a sort of racing car spin-off. Or like the way in which companies exploit their workforce in Sorry I Missed You.
Yeah.
Now that the conversation to me, not to me because it's very, very, very overtly laid out for you as you mentioned, Ben. But it's Loach seeking to explore sort of how poverty sucks the life out of a community.
Okay, yeah.
Leaving its social and very literal architecture decrepit and devoid of the community spirit that was cultivated by the mining industry.
Yes.
And how that what is left is a community that is disjointed and consumed by their own individual issues and problems.
Yeah.
And that has destroyed any connectivity between the people and any sort of desire for collective action.
Yeah.
But it also leaves it as very fertile ground for, as old Mr. Ballantyne, the lead character in the film, points out, for people to punch downwards.
Yes. Yeah.
And that is something which is easily manipulated by ruling powers. So as they sort of seek to shift the blame away from themselves onto others to facilitate the sort of continual use of their economic doctrines that suit only a certain tiny percentage of people.
Yeah.
So all of that stuff, I'm completely on board with. I do try and refrain from my political leanings on this podcast to a degree, but for me, that's something that I'm on board with. I've been on board with the messages in most of Loach's films.
Yeah.
And the basis of, helping people, ostensibly, helping people to understand that, the problems in this country are not caused by people fleeing war and persecution.
Oh, completely. I want to say at this point, I totally agree with you.
he's lying.
My issue with the film is completely in the way it's constructed.
Yeah, and this is, and I agree in the sense that. Sorry, I've really gone on a long one here. But
mate, no.
The idea, what I'm trying to say is, in a roundabout, really long-winded way, is that I buy the film more on that basis of the thematic intent.
Yeah.
So even though I felt it was incredibly overt and unsubtle, I buy it on that basis.
Okay, yeah.
But again, there were moments I thought, oof.
Just the stuff in the pub with the locals, I was like, I'm really... were they actors?
I think so.
I wasn't. I was really unconvinced by their performances, apart from the chap who looked a bit like Mark Commode. You know who I mean. He was all right, but I don't know whether it might be something upbringing based, but I couldn't. They were just so unconvincing. It threw me off so much that the intention of the film was so pure and so warm and lovely, and the message is very clear, and it's a message I completely, I'm very much on board with, and I think that the presentation of the way that the immigrants, the Syrian refugees in this case, and attempting to integrate themselves into a community that is fractured already, I liked all of that stuff. I thought that was really good. I get on the nose, but in a way that I could get behind.
Yeah.
But it was the presentation of the locals that I really thought that just... I was baffled by how insincere it all felt. And it might just be a performance thing, and I think it might be a slight writing thing as well. In that there was it was so obviously constructed reality. It was like watching a play.
Yeah.
And it was just too much.
There is something very theatrical, play-like about it, isn't there?
Yeah, completely.
In the pub. I think those sequences get stronger, and I don't mean this in terms of my levels of enjoyment, but when the sort of racism is properly unmasked and is direct.
True. When voices are raised, it
starts to sort of feel a little bit less like a play. More like a movie.
Yeah, true.
In those moments, in service of the themes that the film is trying to explore.
Yeah.
Not in terms of my overall enjoyment. But no, I take your point about that. But I wonder, I feel like, because we've sort of said we've noticed that obviously Loach is departing from that sort of real sort of raw, sort of almost cinema verite, kitchen sink aesthetic sort of thing, into this sort of more drama focused stage of his career. So maybe he just doesn't give a shit. Maybe this is what he wants to do. And I think Paul Laverty, who writes the screenplay, is frequent collaborator with Loach. I feel like his scripts, he's been very explicit in this film in talking about it. Is about not just about the challenges and the difficulties and the horrors of everyday life, not just for the locals of these sort of villages torn apart by oppressive economic doctrines. It's also about hope, trying to instill a sense of hope. And I think that's where maybe the more fanciful elements of the film sprout from. That intention to maybe not be so burdened by the cynicism and the worthy cynicism, I guess, of the situation that these people are living in. Because there's something so tragic about seeing people that are struggling, blaming and coming down even harder on people that have struggled more.
I mean, there's a great... Actually, there is a really good scene in this, which I did buy into quite a lot, whereby someone is ill, aren't they? It's a sort of... girl gets ill, and one of the refugees with the I can't remember her name.
Lead character.
Yeah, the lead character.
That's not her name.
That's not her name. Yeah, lead character. she takes her home, and this girl says, it's usually better after I have something sweet. She starts looking through the cupboards for something sweet, and then her mum comes home, and she's sort of, it's very clear that she's embarrassed at how bare her cupboards are.
Yeah.
But her reaction is like quite vitriolic and quite. She kind of kicks her out, and she's quite
racist.
She is, overtly racist. And that worked for me. I thought that was really effective in hammering home that sort of reactionary nature of how they're perceiving these refugees. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah.
That
I've
was
not
a really
considered
good
that
one.
as a scene in yeah, but yeah, you're absolutely right in terms of the everyday existence of those beliefs and how they bubble under the surface.
Yeah.
And then all they need is something like shame, embarrassment.
Yeah.
And they just
Comes
come out of
out.
nowhere.
Yeah,
And it almost humanizes it. Not to the point of obviously saying that racism should be given any sort of, but it humanizes the origin of these belief systems.
Yeah.
And I think through humanizing the origin of these things, are we only going to understand the best course of action to deal with it? Because I think there's another moment in the film where, in one of those sort of more overt pub sequences with the blokes who are all chatting away, one of the characters says, we moan about these things, and we've got some posh people in London telling us we're racist.
Oh yeah,
and it sort of speaks this idea that obviously there's a lot of resentment towards London from people in the north.
Understandably, yeah.
But it's this idea that there are people who would just immediately write these people off on the basis of what they've said and what they claim to believe. Yeah. Without really trying to understand why they might actually believe it.
Okay.
And perhaps through sort of meaningful discussion, which, it's easy for me to say perhaps, but, is the only way that you can really sort of try and turn these people around and get them to understand that the situation they're living in is not the fault of people that are fleeing war and persecution, or someone that hasn't got a job down the street, or these problems are far more deeply rooted in the fabric of our society, as much as the ruling powers would have those people believe. And I guess that brings us to the next part of this discussion, which is, who are these films for? And what is the who is seeing these films? Because we're talking about, the film has a very overt nod to that, this idea that, these men are going to be judged on the basis of their ill-founded beliefs. But yet, to me, the sort of in that line of dialogue, sort of criticising those kinds of people, this film is only going to be really watched by those kinds of people, right? I don't know, because we were talking about this a lot, weren't we? And I've had many conversations with people regarding English social realism, particularly more modern examples. Where do they play? Where are these films playing? They're going to be playing in art house cinemas.
A lot of which are in London.
But I saw Daniel Blake in the Quad in Derby. I love the Quad; it's a great cinema. But the people in there weren't the kind of people that were from the same housing estate that my dad lived on.
Right?
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
In Bristol, when I saw the Old Oak, most of the people, I mean, you have a quick look around, they're either like students or older people that appear, to have come from a background that has allowed them to engage with this kind of culture more readily, and be more aware of this culture more readily.
Completely,
And you went to see it. Where did you see it?
I saw it at the View, and
okay.
Yeah, but there was no one in the cinema. It was me and another couple, and that was it. I was a bit annoyed because I was about to clamber up, because I bought a really cheap seat. Going to clamber up and go on some of the better seats, and then I sat down there. So I was like, I can't do it now. But yeah, it's funny. I spent ages looking for a suitable place to watch it. The Watershed. It was playing at the Watershed, but it's like the opposite way to where I go home. So I chose View, and I kind of wish I'd chosen the Watershed just because it's a much better cinema. No one was there, man. It was tucked away, screen 10. It was just kind of like, I guess this is on our release slate. They didn't even check my ticket.
Fucking hell.
It was just, it was quite, and that does speak to
broken Britain.
But I imagine at the Watershed they treated it as a sort of, the Ken Loach movie, right?
Yeah,
This is an art house event, but should it be? I think that's kind of the question you're asking.
Yeah, I just feel like I remember debating the merits of I, Daniel Blake with with Jan, dear friend Jan.
Oh yeah.
And he said something that really stuck with me. He said the problem with these films is that the only people that will go and see them are people that don't mind paying £8 for a small tub of Haagen-Dazs. And ever since he said that, I'm not sure sort of how universally true it is, and obviously it's impossible for him to know and for me to know, as the backgrounds of people who watched this film and who interacted with this film. But from my limited experience, it appeared to me in any time I've seen a Ken Loach film or a film of similar sort of political motivations or a similar sort of social awareness, that the only people that watch these films are people that are either people that have a vested interest in the medium, people like us, or people that have had the background and the upbringing that has allowed them to engage with stuff away from what's just on Netflix, or the multiplex, And I feel like that's a problem if you're wanting, because you're preaching to the choir, you're preaching to the converted, right? Like these people, like me and you, we already know or feel like we know, the problems that are facing this country, and we know that for sure we wouldn't go out and blame an asylum seeker or an immigrant a poor person in the street. So
preposterous to me, like the idea of that.
Yeah, exactly. So we're already on side.
Yep.
So you said it, when we were messaging about it after we had a brief discussion about our sort of initial thoughts, and you said just echo chamber, right?
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
So what do you do? Like, if this film's going to have the impact, surely it needs to be shown to the communities where these kind of conversations are probably more prevalent.
Yeah, exactly.
How do is it happening? I don't know. It doesn't feel like it.
I mean, I don't. Yeah, I mean, it all boils down to distribution, and maybe this film was perhaps slightly mismarketed in the sense that it's getting marketed to the choir that have already been converted. And now, there's going to be like, I love this phrase. It's a phrase I believe you coined, and I've said it before. There's going to be like a temporary moral realignment of people that watch it, in the sense that it might inspire them to, maybe I'll take on a refugee family or something. But then that'll melt away as they go back to their normal, relatively privileged Haagen-Dazs based lives, and that's all it's going to do, and that's a shame, because it shouldn't be that way. Although I have expressed some strong opinions about some aspects of this film. The message is so solid and so clear, and quite a warm message of, hey, you can do this. Like, you if the film is meant to inspire communities to stick together and eat together, right? Like, they should be played to those communities, and it's odd to me that it's not. It's getting played to,
I mean, I don't know. Like, I just feel like if the idea is to inspire, to sort of reignite the fires of community and togetherness and collective action, then there has to be a farer reach in the way in which not just Ken Loach, but other people with similar political beliefs who utilise their own art form or mediums to convey their message or convey their frustration with the system. It has to sort of hit those people more.
Yeah.
Because I think, we're talking about the idea of temporary moral realignments, like all those people, including us, have seen I, Daniel Blake. All those people, including us, have seen Sorry I Missed You. We've now all seen Ye Old Oak.
Yeah.
And there isn't really a sign of anything changing, the rhetoric changing.
No.
Or a seismic shift from, huge portions of people from this class, banding together and sticking up for one another. And so I don't know, maybe it speaks to the limitations of the medium more than anything else, which is a really heartbreaking thing to say as someone that adores movies and really subscribes to the power of movies and what they can represent and what they can do.
They can change the world, I think. But they have to be distributed right, I suppose.
Perhaps the limitation isn't necessarily to do with the medium, but as you say, the way in which these films are sort of sold to people and showed to people.
Yeah.
And I think that leaves Loach himself perhaps more open to criticism from his detractors, right? They're going to say stuff like, well, it's not changing anything.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, that's bollocks anyway.
But, no, yeah, it can.
No, it's just, like, I do wonder about that, and I think about that quite a lot, particularly in the context of films that have these sort of, this is very different, but we talked about it with Barbie, didn't we? I mean, Barbie is... and in fact, as time has gone on, my opinion about the element of Barbie's actually impacted my enjoyment of the film a lot more.
Oh, right, okay.
Because I'm starting to think, well, that film, to me now, I don't know, like, it just feels more and more like, despite the fact the messages ostensibly are good in some areas, it's still $1 billion fucking franchise that is made.
Almost 1.5 now.
Yeah.
I checked today.
That is made to... which is obviously going to make a company a lot of money. A company that is part of this big collection of companies and businesses that are going to uphold the way things are. So, I don't know. I think perhaps cinema as a capitalist enterprise, it's difficult for filmmakers like Loach to have the same sort of impact that maybe his earlier films did in the landscape that we operate in now. I don't know. I just hope that perhaps these films are being screened and we're just not aware of it through our ignorance.
Well, maybe. I mean, I think this isn't a solution. This is a terrible idea, actually. But maybe if the film employed some more subtle techniques, like, because quite often you have films that are about something, like Kes. It's about a boy who is kind of training himself in the art of falconry, right? But really what it's about is schooling system, isn't it? Like that, there's a kind of an undercurrent of the way the schools were structured was that you were sent to different schools based on your level of intelligence. And that was like, that was a dreadful thing. Like, all it did, it was just like marginalized a bunch of children and provided the ego to another bunch of children, and that was what that film also was about, really. But it was subtle enough to deliver it in a kind of offhand, like kind of under the table almost. And maybe one of the solutions, as I said, this is a bad idea because it's not going to work either. But is to deliver that message like that instead, like as a kind of almost. More kind of deviously, right? Or maybe the film The Old Oak shouldn't have ended with the plumbing going to shit, and because I guess the message of the film was, if you try and feed your community, it's going to fuck your pub up. I don't know. I was kind of baffled by how that didn't resolve itself, actually.
See, I quite like that it didn't.
Really?
Yeah, because I mean, if we're talking about the idea of the Loach's sort of social realist credentials suffering as a result of drama, things ending nicely probably would have done more disservice to his to that. Right. You know what I mean? Like,
I completely see where you're coming from.
Like, it feels like the battle isn't won. These people have come together and done something really wonderful, but there are still a lot of people who are blinded by hate, blinded by the sort of tribal instinct to protect what they feel is theirs. They are going to do horrible things in order to preserve those things. So I think, obviously there is a tone of hope in the film, but I think it has to be anchored in some sense of realism that these problems still exist and will continue to exist. I think actually one scene that really struck me and was really lovely, in a quite tragic sense, in the spoilers, from the families, their father has been killed in prison. Yeah. And that is when the community really bands together and really shows a kind of genuine love for this family, who have in a kind of subtle way changed their lives by feeding them. That was lovely, and that moved me nearly to tears. That was a really powerful sort of moment in the film, which, as I said, by and large I had quite mixed feelings about. But I thought the sort of stilted nature of some of the dialogue early on set me up for a hopeful ending, because none of it felt real anyway. Do you know what I mean? I kind of felt like, fair enough. Why didn't they show a scene of some guy from the community coming around and be like, "Oh, fix your plumbing for free"? And then he does it, and then everyone comes back, and I don't know. I was genuinely expecting an ending like that. And when what I received was a really touching
but to me, an incomplete story.
Okay,
there you go.
I think it also, like, is it just something that's like should be leveled at, you know, Loach? Like, you know, the landscape of film is so different now, and it's harder now more than ever to get a movie that isn't a superhero film to be seen by more than just the people who do like to pay £7 for a tub of Haagen-Dazs or wear like an open scarf even though it's July. You know, like, we lament these people, but you know, it's these people are the ones that are going and watching the small independent movies. Like, I don't know, right. Like, the landscape of film is so different now, and I don't know how much we can really level at. Not that we would anyway at Kent, because I'm not saying it's Loach's fault. No, imagination. It is definitely sort of.
If it was up to him, everyone would watch it.
Yeah, right? Exactly. It is obviously like a cultural issue. And it's probably a cultural issue that's enforced by the same powers that the film is sort of critical of, really. But yeah, the landscape feels so different. I mean, you know, Scorsese's been saying this loads, hasn't he, about how tough it is for filmmakers to even get their ideas off the ground. And how the use of the term independent has almost like pigeonholed filmmakers into this sort of bind that they can't break out of. I don't know. Like, I think that the landscape is making it harder and harder than it's ever been for independent voices, or voices that have, you know, intentions to explore the problems in the worlds they inhabit, to be seen on a larger scale than ever. I think, you know, you're right. The landscape is so different. It's like a paradox almost. I don't really know. I don't have a solution at all. And I guess, you know, if it is his last film, as an expression of an ideal, it works beautifully. Like, it's a wonderful. I think manifesto is probably the wrong word, but do you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
But as a piece of filmmaking, it fell short of my kind of expectations a little bit, and I'm left baffled and I'm very mixed on it. I would recommend it. In a sense, but be ready to, you know, sit through some pretty questionable dialogue and some. It's never boring. That's another thing. There's a couple of other sort of personal threads, not personal to Loach, but personal to the main character, the Ballantyne, which are again really interesting and done kind of quite understated, very basically done. Like, it's all sort of tripod setups, but you know, it's a social realist film, so what do you expect, really? But yeah, like I say, as an expression of an ideal, really works. But I just think it could do with maybe a couple of rewrites, maybe. Okay. which I feel a bit bad saying, because I shouldn't. Maybe I shouldn't feel bad, but I do. Weirdly, I do feel bad, because it's like I'm criticising something that I share a lot of values with. So yeah, it makes me slightly uncomfortable even saying that. But there we go. Yeah.
No, I can understand that. I mean, I wasn't as bothered by those elements, but I definitely feel that the script in the last three films, particularly I, Daniel Blake, and this one, it has. Yeah, subtlety is not the consideration here.
No.
And I think in some ways I feel that that's more merited given the sort of intent.
There's a bit at the end where she puts a camera next to all the flowers for her dad. Do you reckon she picks it up again? Because
I imagine probably.
Yeah, okay. Because that was another thing I thought was a bit odd. I was like, are you going to give up photography? I liked that about you. And also, like I said, that's expensive. Like, again, like, it's weird because, like, as an expression, it's a really nice thing to do, and it's like, oh, you're kind of giving back what was given to you. But like on a practical level, what are you doing? Pick it up. It might rain.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, the film jumps quite far ahead in time after that moment, so it's difficult to know if she ever did.
Yeah, no. There's a final shot of them walking down the road in solidarity, which is very nice.
I love that banner they make as well. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it's so cool. And we like that line as well. It's not charity, it's solidarity.
Yeah,
That's a really, again, on the nose, but it's a line
that works. Though,
I
like
think
that.
it's
those who eat together stick together. That's another nice thing.
It's that fusion of like, you know, the sort of principles of the mining movement of the 1980s with, you know, Syrian culture. The idea of eating together and celebrating family. I think, you know, if you think about, you know, English community in the way, and then comparing it to others, we're tremendously isolated.
Yeah.
You know, like, I don't really know my neighbour. I mean, I've not lived in my area very long, but I don't know my neighbours well enough just to invite them over for like a curry.
Yeah,
you know? And I probably wouldn't necessarily either.
We've started with we've moved quite recently. We've started a WhatsApp group with like this other couple that live next door. And I've been building up the courage to ask them round for like.
Maybe they're listening now.
They might be. Hey, Alex,
in the bath.
Do you want to come round for a beer? I really want to ask you, but for some reason, my kind of social anxiety prevents me from doing so. Which is stupid. But come round, have a bloody samosa and a Peroni and a Häagen-Dazs
and we'll watch. No, it's interesting. I think, you know, just quickly before we go for the outro, it feels like that's like, again, maybe like a sort of like a shockwave impact thing from the sort of smashing of the unions and sort of Thatcherite Britain. You know, the idea of community. We have to destroy the idea of community, because if people are together still, they can sort of push back.
But as a collective,
if we can isolate them and you know, and they just think about themselves and the immediate others, you know, that allows for, you know, a landscape that we can manipulate with greater ease.
Agreed.
Really, which is horribly sad, you know, like, as so socially awkward and odd as I am, I would love the idea of our communities having communities.
I'm sure everyone else on this road feels the same. But it's weirdly unspoken. Like, we kind of get, maybe it's something to do with our kind of social upbringing, in that it's like you'd rather not, because what if it goes wrong? And that's just stupid, like, you know. And actually, it's funny, when I was growing up, I was this little place called Southborough. Our road were really tight, really close. We used to go camping together and stuff.
Wow, yeah.
And that was really special. I always thought, like, if I were to have children, I'd want the same for them. So I better get on that WhatsApp group.
Get the Peronis out. Dig out the samosas from the freezer.
Absolutely.
I had something similar. I lived in a cul-de-sac in Derby, and all the parents knew each other.
So special about
there's something really nice. You could almost just sort of like, you walk into each other's houses as kids, and the parents would be like, "You're right." It wouldn't be a problem. You know?
No, not at all. Have you got some tea bags? Have you got some butter or whatever? Some Peroni.
Be lovely to see that come back. And if anything, even if the film isn't necessarily seen by everybody, and most importantly, the people need to see, I think the messages are still important. And if they can inspire people to keep thinking about these things, and I guess that is an achievement in some way. No,
agreed. Message is whole and out there for everyone to see, and like, it is an important one as well. So
agreed.
Nice.
Outro.
Questing the cinematic void.
There we have it.
We have it.
Really good to talk about that.
Nice.
A very sprawling, broad discussion. It's hard to keep the reins on a discussion like that, I think, because there's so many different angles.
There's a lot of offshoots to social realism.
And so many temptations to really sort of get into the sort of political side of things, which is always frisky, isn't it? Next week, we're going to move as far away from social realism as is humanly possible.
Absolutely.
Into the realms of sci-fi.
Yes.
With Gareth Edwards as the creator.
Yep.
Outro thoughts, which has become a little bit of a thing. I think it looks hopelessly derivative and largely quite naff. However, I will try and beat those thoughts off out of me before I watch the film, because I really want to give it my best.
I think you said to me a couple of days ago, or last podcast recording, you said like it looked like a Neil Blomkamp film. It looked like District 9, but like you say, derivative version of that without any of the social consciousness. And that, I actually was weirdly looking forward to The Creator before that because I thought the trailer looked really. There was a lot of explosions in the trailer. I was like, oh, the way they did those explosions was quite good. And it turned out they used a bit of footage from, you remember that explosion in Beirut? That
really?
Yeah. They used some shaky, morally shaky ground there.
Fucking hell, I didn't know that.
Yeah, apparently it's not in the film, but as a way of marketing a film. What are you doing? Like,
that's a bit insensitive.
Yeah, not good. Yeah. So yeah, I'm curious about this one. It's an odd one. That I don't understand how funding was acquired for it. But
no, he's a curious filmmaker, Gareth. We talked about this before. I mean, obviously his Monster, wasn't it? Was his debut?
Yes.
Which is I quite liked.
Monsters.
Monsters. Oh yeah. God, embarrassing.
Monsters is the Patty Jenkins film, starring Charlize Theron.
And then he sort of had a bit of a weird, patchy career. I mean, Godzilla.
Yeah,
which wasn't really crap. It was just pretty forgettable.
Yeah, I saw that with you actually.
Yeah,
the Phoenix. Yeah.
My birthday.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And
Rogue One,
which I quite like actually.
I thought it was commendable effort.
Yeah.
I thought the humour was really shit in it.
Yeah.
But apart from that, like as a Star Wars movie and as a kind of war epic, it did work.
And I just like Star Wars films that piss off the Star Wars fan base. That's probably part of the reason I like it more than anything else.
Yeah.
But an interesting filmmaker. We'll dig deep more into that, and obviously we'll talk about the film. We'll talk about some of our favourite sci-fi films.
Yeah.
Because it's a genre we haven't really discussed as Boys to Cinnamon, funnily enough.
Not really.
Not in great detail.
No, I'm sure we've touched on a few, but nothing overt.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that one.
Lovely.
In the meantime, enjoy this one, and we'll be in your ears soon.
Yeah, see you then.
Love you lots. Bye-bye.
Bye.